We were in this paragraph, which is just the second paragraph. And we are discussing about the three ways of being of the mother, of which you can become aware when you enter into touch of oneness with the conscious force that upholds us and the universe. The first aspect which we saw last time was that of the Transcendent, the original Supreme Shakti. She stands above the worlds and links the creation to the ever unmanifest mystery of the Supreme. I remember here we had read the explanation given by the mother about when the question was asked, what is the Transcendent Mother? This was from her comments, and we covered just a page and a half, 96 and 97. And I just stopped at the sentence and I went into some other paragraphs from Sri Aurobindo. But I'd like to complete that para. If you can open on page 97. There's a second question. She existed in the Supreme, then before the creation? In the Supreme, it's a little difficult to speak of within and without when one is outside all forms. If you like, say that she is a movement of the Supreme, if that makes you understand better, or an action of the Supreme or a state of the Supreme, a mode. You may say what you like, what most gives you an understanding of the thing. You see, the human mind likes to cut things into little bits. I'm going to tell you a little story meant for children. The Supreme, having decided to create a universe, took a certain inner attitude which corresponded with the inner manifestation, unexpressed, of the Divine Mother, the Supreme Shakti. Now you see, of course, the mother is getting very philosophic here. You see, pretty close we see the same words in Sri Aurobindo. The Supreme, having decided to create a universe, took a certain inner attitude which corresponded with the inner manifestation unexpressed of the Divine Mother. Coming back to Sri Aurobindo's lines, we see, she stands above the worlds and links the creation to the ever unmanifest mystery of the Supreme. It's the same thing that she's saying, the unexpressed manifestation. At the same time, he did this with the intention of its being the mode of creation of the universe he wanted to create, the creative power of the universe. Hence, first of all, he had to conceive the possibility of the Divine Mother in order that this Divine Mother could conceive the possibility of the universe. You are following? I tell you once again that it is not quite like that. But after all, it is meant for childish minds. So we may very well say that there is a transcendent Divine Mother that is independent of her creation. So please see, this is what Sri Aurobindo is explaining about the transcendent, the original Supreme Shakti. She stands above the world. So that is what the mother is telling, that she is independent of her creation, because this is prior to the creation of the universes. She may have been conceived, formed, whatever you like, for the creation, with the purpose of creation. But she has to exist before the creation to be able to create. Else, how could she have created? That is the transcendent aspect. And note that this transcendent aspect is permanent. We speak as though things had unfolded in time at a date which could be fixed, the 1st of January 0000 for the beginning of the world, but it's not quite like that. There's constantly a transcendent, constantly a universal, constantly an individual, and the transcendent, universal and individual are coexistent. That is, if you enter into a certain state of consciousness, you can at any moment be in contact with the transcendent Shakti, and you can also, with another movement, be in contact with the universal Shakti and be in contact with the individual Shakti, and all this simultaneously. That does not unfold itself in time. It is we who move in time as we speak, otherwise we cannot express ourselves. So this is precisely what Sri Aurobindo himself is explaining in this paragraph about the three aspects or the triple aspect. In fact, in another place he calls it as the triune aspects of the divine. The triune, all the three are simultaneously there. So she says that, and all this simultaneously, that does not unfold itself in time. It is we who move in time. We may experience it, but we can express it only by saying one word after another. Unfortunately, one cannot say all the words at the same time. If one could say them all at the same time, that would be a little more like the truth. Finally, all that is said, all that has been said, all that will be said is always an extremely clumsy and limited way of expressing something which may be lived but which cannot be described. And there is a moment when one lives the thing, in which one sees that the same thing can be expressed almost with the same exactness or the same truth in religious language, mystical language, philosophic language, and materialistic language, and that from the point of view of the lived truth, it makes very little difference. It is only when one is in the mental consciousness that one thing seems true to you and another does not seem true. But all these are only ways of expression. The experience carries in itself its absolute, but words cannot describe it. One may choose one language or another to express oneself, and with just a very little precaution, one can always say something approaching the truth in all instances. I am telling you this not to throw you into confusion, but simply to let you understand that there is a considerable difference between the truth of experience and the way of expressing it, whatever it may be, even the best. Well, I think you have got in essence what is being said in this paragraph. So we will read this paragraph and take it up again in a different way. Let me give it a full reading, the whole paragraph. So what are the three poises or aspects that the mother has already described in this book? And Sri Aurobindo says, transcendent, the original Supreme Shakti, she stands above the worlds and links the creation to the ever unmanifest mystery of the Supreme. Universal, the cosmic Mahashakti, she creates all these beings and contains and enters, supports and conducts all these million processes and forces. Individual, she embodies the power of these two vaster ways of our existence. makes them living and near to us, and mediates between the human personality and the divine nature. Well, it looks simple. The para is pretty clear. But I must tell you, with a little difference, especially in the third aspect, this paragraph is a summary of a chapter in the Life Divine. This chapter is chapter 2 in book 2, called Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara, Maya, Prakriti, Shakti. And I think I referred to this before in one of my talks. I would say this chapter from the Mother, chapter 6 that we are doing, is in fact a quintessence of this beautiful chapter from the Life Divine. And if you have time, go through this chapter, you will understand really the basics of Indian philosophy, Indian spiritual thought, and also you will understand the different facets of Indian spiritual culture with all its thousands of gods and goddesses. A lot of things get cleared here. So I will read out from this chapter a para or two. You don't have this. This is chapter 2, Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara, book 2. Please remember, book 2, part 1. It's just the second chapter, second paragraph, and here is exactly what we read out from the Mother, where she is telling us about the language, if you remember. She says, all that is said, all that has been said, all that will be said is always only an extremely clumsy and limited way of expressing something which may be lived but which cannot be described. All these are only ways of expression. The experience carries in itself its absolute, but words cannot describe it. We have a similar paragraph in this chapter where Sri Aurobindo writes, this is para 2 of this chapter, and in my edition is page 293. This is the American edition. But although thus indeterminable to mind because of its absoluteness and infinity, we discovered that the supreme and eternal infinite determines itself to our consciousness in the universe by real and fundamental truths of its being, which are beyond the universe and in it, and are the very foundation of its existence. These truths present themselves to our conceptual cognition as the fundamental aspects in which we see and experience the omnipresent reality. In themselves, they are seized directly, not by intellectual understanding, but by a spiritual intuition, a spiritual experience in the very substance of our consciousness. If you remember, the Mother too said the same thing. You can experience it, but you cannot describe the truth. And look at Sri Aurobindo's emphasis. In themselves, they are seized directly, not by intellectual understanding, but by a spiritual intuition, a spiritual experience in the very substance of our consciousness. But they can also be caught in conception by a large and plastic idea, and can be expressed in some sort by a plastic speech which does not insist too much on rigid definition or limit the wideness and subtlety of the idea. In order to express this experience or this idea with any nearness, a language has to be created, which is at once intuitively metaphysical and revealingly poetic, admitting significant and living images as the vehicle of a close, suggestive and vivid indication. A language such as we find hammered out into a subtle and pregnant massiveness in the Veda and the Upanishads. So now you understand the importance of the Vedas and the Upanishads. It is not only the great experience, but they have hammered out a language which can express the supreme experience of the Brahman and of the different aspects. So he has really given us that the nearest, the best expression of the spiritual truth is the Veda and the Upanishads. That's the type of language that is required. It's not the question of elaborately describing. It must be, as he says beautifully, intuitively metaphysical and revealingly poetic. And then you see, admitting significant and living images as the vehicle of a close, suggestive and vivid indication. So the Vedas is full of images, comparisons, really images from daily life, the cows and the horses and the ghee and all that. So it must be full of images because it is revealingly poetic, suggestive, and its subtle and pregnant massiveness is there. In the ordinary tongue of metaphysical thought, we have to be content with a distant indication, an approximation by abstractions, which may still be of some service to our intellect, for it is this kind of speech which suits our method of logical and rational understanding. But if it is to be of real service, the intellect must consent to pass out of the bounds of a finite logic and accustom itself to the logic of the infinite. On this condition alone, by this way of seeing and thinking, it ceases to be paradoxical or futile to speak of the ineffable. But if we insist on applying a finite logic to the infinite, the omnipresent reality will escape us, and we shall grasp instead an abstract shadow, a dead form petrified into speech, or a hard incisive graph which speaks of the reality but does not express it. I just took out this para only to expand what the mother said about the language possibility. So here we have Sri Aurobindo describing the different levels of language. The best and the highest language that has yet been hammered out by human mind or intuition is that of the Vedas and the Upanishads. Next he speaks of the metaphysical thought, which may have an approximation by abstractions and which may be still of some service to our intellect. That is a philosophic language. But the intellect must consent to pass out of the bounds. So here he insists that any logic or any kind of wanting to have a logical, structural understanding of the supreme spiritual experience, he says, is futile. Mind must surpass itself. So on this condition alone, by this way of seeing and thinking, it ceases to be paradoxical or futile to speak of the ineffable. Otherwise, if we really insist so much on the logical understanding, then things will become paradoxical, non-understandable, and then they will be futile even. So he puts in a beautiful way that you may speak of the reality but does not express it. That's our human, common, logical, intellectual language. We may describe it in a million ways, but we do not express it. That which gives the real expression. I really remember suddenly something comes to my mind. Once I had, in one of my birthday offerings to the mother, I had done the 4 aspects of the mother, sketches, not sketch but in Chinese ink drawing. But the important thing is, on the first page I had this mother's symbol, and in the central circle I had drawn the mother's picture. And she said, it's good, but you have not caught my soul. It's exactly what Sri Aurobindo is telling us. That you may be able to speak of the reality, but you cannot express it. So I had done a very close diagram, picture of the mother. I had seen it from a calendar. I know the dimensions, everything I calculated, so there's nothing that goes wrong. So you can see a good picture of the mother. She says, good, but it doesn't catch my soul. So that's what is the meaning of, you can speak of the reality, but you'll not be able to express it. So there must be something inner. There must be, how can you express the truth unless you have an identity with it? Mentally, you have 1,000 different books describing the reality. But when it comes to the experience, if you don't have it, nothing can, as you said, normally, you can describe a sugar cube a million ways, but you can just taste 1 grain of it and you have all the taste. So a million ways of describing sugar is useless once you really taste it. So that's exactly what Sri Aurobindo is insisting. Our way of knowing must be appropriate to that which is to be known. Otherwise we achieve only a distant speculation, a figure of knowledge, and not veritable knowledge. Life Divine you read and you get mesmerized by his way of writing. Our way of knowing must be appropriate to that which is to be known. You see, if I want to know the table, okay, I can use some scientific instruments. So to know matter, you can use material things, physical things. But to know that which is beyond matter, that which is spirit, you have to use the spirit within you. That is the soul or the Atman. So that appropriate to that which is to be known. So we cannot, as I normally tell, you cannot use a microscope to look at the moon. Microscope is important to look at these atomic things which are very small, but to look at the moon you need a telescope. So you need the change of instrumentality. So if you want to see the spirit, make the spirit within you as the instrument of knowledge. If you want to see something material, use the material things. So similarly with our language. Well, that was in connection with what the mother said, and very interestingly I found in Sri Aurobindo also the same way, but in a greater detail. Now coming to the real substance, as I said, it's amazing, you see, by the time Sri Aurobindo wrote, at the time when Sri Aurobindo wrote this book, The Mother, 1927, he had already written the Life Divine, as all of you know. So when I read once again this afternoon this chapter, and when I see this chapter, The Mother, especially chapter 6, it is one is the, as he says, we have put it beautifully. He says one is intuitively metaphysical, as the Life Divine, and revealingly poetic, that's the Mother. The same truth expressed in 2 different ways: revealingly poetic, intuitively metaphysical. Now, to explain this single para and also the next para, in fact the 2 paragraphs, this and the next one, I'd like to take you to the Life Divine, the same chapter, page 295. But let me read this second para so that you have some idea of what's happening. I'll come back to that in detail, but let me read it first. The one original transcendent Shakti The Mother stands above all the worlds and bears in her eternal consciousness the Supreme Divine. Well, I'll come back to this para because every word is so pregnant with meaning. Alone, she harbors the absolute power and the ineffable presence, containing or calling the truths that have to be manifested. She brings them down from the mystery in which they were hidden into the light of her infinite consciousness, and gives them a form of force in her omnipotent power and her boundless life and a body in the universe. The Supreme is manifest in her forever as the everlasting Sachidananda, manifested through her in the worlds as the one and dual consciousness of Ishvara Shakti and the dual principle of Purusha Prakriti, embodied by her in the worlds and the planes and the gods and their energies, and figured because of her as all that is in the known worlds and the unknown others. All is her play with the Supreme. All is her manifestation of the mysteries of the eternal, the miracles of the infinite. All is she, for all are parcel and portion of the divine conscious force. Nothing can be here or elsewhere but what she decides and the Supreme sanctions. Nothing can take shape except what she, moved by the Supreme, perceives and forms after casting it into seed in her creating Ananda. So these are the two paragraphs which have been explained in the sense we get the complete idea of these two paragraphs in this chapter. You see, there are all these terms: Purusha, Prakriti, Ishvara, Shakti, Adya Shakti, the Transcendent Shakti, and the Supreme manifest in her forever, etc., etc. All this can be found in this chapter. So, I will read out only very important paragraphs, important in the sense I don't have time to go through this chapter. But I'll give you whatever is connected with our paragraphs. Let me first read out a few sentences, then I'll take up the explanation on the board if possible. An absolute, eternal, and infinite self-existence, self-awareness, self-delight of being that secretly supports and pervades the universe even while it is also beyond it, is then the first truth of spiritual experience. But this truth of being has at once an impersonal and a personal aspect. Is not only existence, is the one being absolute, eternal, and infinite. And there are three fundamental aspects in which we meet this reality: self, conscious being or spirit, and God, the divine being, or to use the Indian terms, the absolute and omnipresent reality, Brahman manifest to us as Atman, Purusha, Ishvara. So too its power of consciousness appears to us in three aspects. It is the self-force of that consciousness, conceptively creative of all things, Maya. It is Prakriti, nature or force made dynamically executive, working out all things under the witnessing eye of the conscious being, a self or spirit. It is the conscious part of the divine being, Shakti, which is both conceptively creative and dynamically executive of all the divine workings. These three aspects and their powers base and comprise the whole of existence and all nature, and taken together as a single whole, they reconcile the apparent disparateness and incompatibility of the supreme supracosmic transcendence, the cosmic universality, and the separativeness of our individual existence. The absolute cosmic nature and ourselves are linked in oneness by this triune aspect of the one reality. Well, you have a lot of these terms, but this is exactly what we are referring to in the book The Mother.